Now we're in for our main talk, and again, main talks are kind of like the community moment where we'll have main talks on all kinds of topics. Some free thinkers come here and are surprised that we don't sit around and just talk about how bad religion is all the time, but it gets old. And then when we put this together, someone asked, well, what are you going to talk about every week? Well, it's like, actually, there's a lot more to talk about when you're not confined to one book. And so now we can talk about all of life. So it's beautiful. So that's all we're about. We're about looking at life from just as it is, from a reason-based perspective. And so we've had lots of wonderful topics that open our eyes to all aspects of human experience. And today we have a veteran Oasis presenter. I'm going to read her creative bio that she sent me, because I can't take credit for this. Dr. Natalie Khazaal is an assistant professor at Texas A&M University, specializing in international studies and Arab culture. Born and raised in an atheist country, Dr. Khazaal has been protected from the clutches of religiosity and spiritualism, and often shamelessly describes herself as a level 13 atheist on the Dawkins scale. It only goes to 7, okay? She is interested in progressive movements, from animal rights to secular humanism, and is currently working on a book about ex-Muslims and other Arab atheists. She has 2 dogs and a husband, Jerry Friedman. When they got married, Friedman put up a fight about the last name, but Dr. Khazaal didn't want to give in to sexist traditions, so she let him keep his family name. So, warm welcome to Natalie.
So, on the eve of the the invasion of Iraq, former President George W. Summoned the West to go on a crusade against the evil Middle East on God's behalf. You might know that. You may not know, however, that the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, who is also the former, and who is also a former CEO of Blackwater, which is a private contractor providing mercenary security services to the Department of State and the U.S. military, a man known as Joseph Schmitz. He boasted of being a member of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. This order, Crusader Order, is an 11th century order whose goal was to defend territories that the Crusaders had conquered from the Muslims. Now, these very prominent political figures on whose, decisions not only American politics but global politics depend, they both have very positive views of the impact of the Crusades and their influence today, their validity today. I'm here to share with you some stories and other interesting facts about the Crusades, of which you may not have heard. Now the question is, does the historical evidence corroborate, validate that positive view that these prominent political figures have about the Crusades? And let's look at some of the evidence. We have Rodney Stark, a professor at Baylor University. Where is Baylor?
Waco.
Okay, Waco, right, in Waco. So he's a historian working at Baylor who is making the case for the Crusades in this book called God's Battalions. And from the acclaims on the back cover of the book, we read that Professor Stark, humbly goes to war with the black and white nonsense of secular thinkers in order to tell tales of courage and desperation that the Crusaders experienced centuries ago. I do not recommend you reading this book and taking your information about the Crusades from Baylor University or from Rodney Stark. Instead, I would recommend one of the foremost authorities on the Crusades, Jonathan Riley-Smith of Cambridge University, who is making the case for historical evidence, not for the Crusades, but for historical evidence. And basically, he tells us that the Crusades and what we think about the Crusades, these views of the Crusades we have, they are not the views that people back in the day when the 11th to 13th century, the biggest part of the Crusade movement happened, when people sort of experienced that interaction between East and West. These views of the Crusades we have today were generated with the Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th century, and they're not generated only on the Western side, but they're also generated on the Middle Eastern side. For example, this is a propaganda flyer picture of Saddam Hussein, who compares himself, who calls himself the heir of Saladin. Saladin, one of the big figures during the Crusades. So on one side you see Saddam Hussein with modern tanks, that's on the verge, on the eve of the war against Iran. And here you see another image of Saladin with horses, who is, sort of driving the Crusaders away from the Middle East, from the Palestinian lands. So what does the historical evidence really tell us about what were the Crusades, who were the Crusaders, how did they see each other? There is a lot on the Western side, and there is also quite a bit on the Arab side. Before I go into the historical evidence, which contains some really funny examples, I just want to go over briefly some historical information about the Crusades. So what is a crusade? We have one answer here from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and this is a picture from 1490, depicting one of the Crusades. So what are the Crusades? The word, first of all, the Crusades were very popular. It's a very popular topic, not just in books and histories, but also in Hollywood. One of the first movies on the Crusades done by Hollywood was in 1935 by the very famous director Cecil DeMille, called The Crusades, and it perpetuates outrageous stereotypes about lecherous Arabs and evil Saladin. If you compare it to Kingdom of Heaven about 70 years later with Orlando Bloom, you can see some of these stereotypes have been corrected. The Arabs are no longer lecherous, but some other of the stereotypes are still, the movie is still holding some of these other stereotypes. For example, the stereotype, the thinking that the West is civilizing the East. If you have seen this movie, Kingdom of Heaven, the role that the character that Orlando Bloom plays, he basically teaches Arab children how to dig up aqueducts and how to set up irrigation system, which is hilarious if you consider that the irrigation of the Middle East has been so much more developed than the medieval European irrigation system. But so you know. There are other more recent movies. Sweden made a really big hit with these two movies, Arn 1 and 2. They're really good. And my favorite movie on the Crusades, the Danish movie Valhalla Rising with Mads Mikkelsen. It's a gorgeous movie. It's available on Netflix if you're interested. Watch it. It basically talks about the Vikings going on a crusade, but kind of getting lost and going to North America and meeting with the Native Americans here. It is a really good movie, and it's even though the story is not quite historical, it is probably the most historical of all movies about the Crusades. It really portrays the Crusades in a way that kind of corresponds to the historical evidence of how they felt, what it felt to be on a crusade. There is also movies about the Crusades on the Arab side. 2 Egyptian movies in the 60s, very big and very famous movies. People watch them. I don't know, even today, but Islam and Saladin the Victorious. So Saladin was also popular there. So the Crusades, the word crusade was first introduced to the English language in the middle of the 18th century. And I certainly was thinking, well, does crusade come from Christ, the Anointed? There's some resemblance, but no, he didn't make the top charts. Actually, the word crusade comes from the word cross, from the Latin word from cross, and all the Crusaders, when they took the vow to go to fight against the Muslims and save the Holy Land, they were given cloth crosses that they sewed on their tunics, Thank you. And I was going to say gowns. And and that's why they were basically carrying the cross. So that's why the Crusades. So there are the two different views about the Crusades. The more traditional views is that the Crusades happened between the years of 1095 and the fall of Acre in 1291, about the span of 200 years, about 9 Crusades. But this view is a little bit old-fashioned now. The more pluralist views in the academic circles is that the Crusades actually there's a perpetual crusade. The Crusades never end, which means that they may have started around that time, but the Crusades have continued beyond 1291 all the way up to 1789, when Napoleon conquered Malta and basically defeated the the Crusader Order of the Hospitallers. And even in 1890, just about 100 years ago, in Algeria, there was a new Crusader order that was being set up, and they were thinking about going on a crusade. They were not successful. So throughout history, there has been multiple crusades, both big and small, and the majority of those crusades were actually not against Muslims, Christians against Muslims, but they were internal, inside Europe, Christians against other Christians. What the church thought of as heretics, or against Orthodox Christians, the Greeks, and many of them were pogroms against the Ashkenazi Jews. And Valhalla Rising, that movie really portrays that very beautifully, these internal crusades. The crusades were open to everybody. Psychopaths could join. The church could not really enforce any military order, so they were, everybody could be fighting their own battle. They were accompanied not only, especially those crusades in the earlier days when they had to walk before they discovered that they could actually use the boat. They were accompanied by armies of prostitutes as well, and chefs to cook for them. But some of the crusaders were very poor people. So the Crusades basically kind of became something big when the notion of the Holy War took hold in Europe. And they only kind of subsided when Holy War, this notion of Holy War became substituted with a different, more contemporary notion of the just war. And I think this is the most I want to say about the some historical information about the Crusades. And now to the fun portion of this presentation. Some of the historical evidence, some of the annals, what do they tell us about the Crusades? Let's look at this example, and I have left some blanks. Let's read it together and maybe fill in the blanks, and then I'll give you the actual example. So I'm gonna, read the sentence, and you can give me your suggestions about the blanks. One day blank wrote to my uncle blank asking him to send a physician to treat several urgent cases. Any suggestions about the first blank? It's medieval medicine as the topic.
Bishop.
One day,
Bishop.
the bishop. Okay, one day the bishop wrote to my uncle Scar the King. Okay, Scar the King. My uncle Scar the King, asking him to send a physician to treat several urgent cases. My uncle selected one of our doctors, and mind you, this is within the framework of the Crusades. Selected one of our doctors, a man named Cletus. He was gone for just a few days and then returned home. We were all very curious to know how he had been able to cure the patients, and we besieged him with questions. Blank answered, so Cletus. Cletus answered. They brought before me a man who had an abscess on his leg and a woman suffering from consumption. I made a plaster for the night, and the swelling opened and improved. For the woman, I prescribed a diet to revive her constitution. But a blank doctor then arrived and objected. This man does not know how to care for them. But a witch doctor. Okay. But a witch doctor then arrived and objected. This man does not know how to care for them. And addressing blank, he asked, Okay, aggressive cletus, okay, he asked him, which do you prefer, to live with one leg or die with two? When the patient answered that he preferred to live with just one leg, the physician ordered, bring me a strong Arab with a well-sharpened battle axe. The witch doctor placed the man's leg on a chopping block, telling the new arrival, strike a sharp blow to cut cleanly. Before my eyes, the man struck an initial blow, but then, since the leg was still attached, he struck a second time. The marrow of the leg spurted out, and the wounded man died that very instant. As for the woman, the witch doctor examined her and said she has on her head and who has fallen in love with her.
Spell.
Devil, okay, she has devil on her head who has fallen in love with her. Cut her hair. They cut her hair. The woman then began to eat their food again with its end, which aggravated the consumption. Salt and pepper, maggots. Beans and peppers and maggots, okay, which aggravated the consumption. Their doctor affirmed the devil must have entered her head. Then, grasping a razor, he cut an incision in the shape of a cross, exposed the bone of the skull, and rubbed it with salt. The woman died on the spot. I then asked, have you any further need of me? They said no, and I returned home having learned much that I had never known about the medicine of the blank. Of the witch doctors of the Christians. Okay. All right, now let's read the real thing. So this was actually a historical account that one Christian Arab physician, doctor, wrote when he first encountered Western medicine. And Western medicine back in the day was the Crusader medicine. So one day the Frankish governor, Frankish basically is a word that the Arabs used for the Crusaders. Basically, many of them came from the land of the Franks, the French. One day the Frankish governor of Munaita in the Lebanese mountains wrote to my uncle the Sultan, Emir of Shaizar, asking him to send a physician to treat several urgent cases. My uncle selected one of our doctors, a man named Thabit. He was gone for just a few days and then returned home, and we besieged him with questions. Thabit answered, they brought before me a man who had abscess, and I prescribed such and such. But the Frankish doctor, the Crusaders' doctor, then arrived and objected, this man does not know how to care for them. Bring me a strong knight with a well-sharpened battle axe. The Frankish doctor placed the man, chopped the leg, and the man died. As for the woman, the Frankish doctor examined her and said, she has a demon, you are so close, on her head who has fallen in love with her, cut her hair. The woman then began to eat their food again with its garlic and mustard, which aggravated the consumption. The doctor affirmed the devil himself must have entered her head, and they cut an incision in the shape of a cross. And finally, I learned much about the medicine of the French, another word of the Crusades, about the Crusades. So this is a historical account, a written account we have about how Arabs actually saw the Western Crusaders. And from this account, would you say that they saw them as as people who came with the civilizing missions, who were more civilized? What is an opposite of civilized?
Barbarian.
Barbarian. Okay. Well, here are some of the stereotypes that first encounter generated in the eyes of the Arabs, of the local Arabs. The only positive stereotype was that they were good warriors, and they were sort of rumored to never miss when they fired an arrow. No, where they shot an arrow, they never miss. But the negatives were that they were lacking hygiene, they were sexually lax, they were, of course, manners, they were dull, and barbarians. And let me elaborate on these. So, they were thought to shed hair annually. They were thought to bathe only once a year. because they were horrified of bathing. And this is in comparison to the local population who went to public baths very regularly, who did ablutions for their prayers. And I mean, their hygiene was very high on their radar. So the Crusaders were thought to bathe only once a year, and I'm sure a lot of them did. Crusader Acre, the city of Acre, used to stink as it was filled with excrement. I bet Crusader excrement. The Crusaders didn't wash their hair, their garments from the time they put them on until they fell to pieces. They had generic characteristics but lacked individuality. This is such a common thing when we think about the other, about the group of outsiders. They lack individuality. They were ignorant and stupid, and they were overcome by apathy. So you see a lot of stereotypes here, and they were concerned with nothing but war, fighting, and hunting, and they didn't care about any other more elevated topics. So some scholars back in the day, such as the very, very famous Arab historian Masoudi, they tried to sort of understand, try to, muse and analyze why the Crusaders had these sort of features. And he found a geographical explanation. So he said, the people of the northern quadrant are the ones for whom the sun is distant from the zenith, such as the Slavs, the Franks, and their neighbors. Cold and damp prevail in their regions, and snow and ice follow one another in endless succession. So now from this, he is trying to extrapolate their character, their basically features. The warm humor is lacking among them, obviously because of the cold climate. Their bodies are large, their natures gross, their manners harsh, their understanding dull, and their tongues heavy. Their color is so excessively white that it passes from white to blue. Their skin is thin and their flesh thick. Their hair is lank and reddish because of the prevalence of damp mists. Their religious beliefs lack solidity, and this is because of the nature of cold and the lack of warmth.
That's generous.
All right, so, but the one quality that everybody was really, really surprised to discover was that the Crusaders lacked marital jealousy. And I guess that will be my final example. So this is, again, a local Arab who went to the public bath. And he was covered with a loincloth because it was considered polite to be covered with a loincloth. There comes in the public bath for the first time, I guess, a Crusader, and he wants to joke around. He grabs the loincloth from that person, and he discovers that the person is shaved. And so this is the encounter. Salim, the Crusader, exclaimed, "I came toward him, and he pointed to that part of me. Salim, it's magnificent. You shall certainly do the same for me." And he lay down flat on his back. His hair there was as long as his beard. I shaved him, and when he had felt the place with his hand and found it agreeably smooth, he said, "Salim, you must certainly do the same for my dama." In their language, dama means lady or wife. He sent his valet to fetch his wife, and when they arrived and the valet had brought her in, she lay down on her back, and he said to me, "Do to her what you did to me." So I shaved her pubic hair while her husband stood by watching me. Then he thanked me and paid me for my services. Awesome. Now this sexual laxity was so, I guess...
That was like the first Brazilian.
Was so entertaining that it brings us to be thinking, yes, the first Brazilian, to be thinking, if the Crusaders didn't have any of these qualities that the Middle Easterns or the Arabs had of hygiene and the Brazilian and the medicine and trying to scientifically explain using geography, I mean a pretty decent explanation to understand human nature. Can we really claim, and do these political figures, famous important political figures, should they claim historical heritage to the Crusades, and if so, is that historical heritage as positive as they tend to want us to believe? Is it a mission to civilize, or does the historical evidence actually tell us something completely different? And as the historian whose book I recommended, Riley Smith, as he says, we need to open our eyes to the actuality, not the imagined reality of our past. And that includes not only reading Baylor University written historical books, but also going out of our comfort zone and reading evidence from the other side, evidence from as it was seen, as that encounter was seen from Arab eyes, for example. Well, thank you. And I forgot to recommend, there are really good books, but one of them is Otter Mare by Nabil Saleh. It's a book that is available, and there are other books that are really interesting if you're interested in that topic. A lot of them, yeah.
I have a question about, it's obvious that you have certain elements within Western society that have this attitude of cultural superiority over Hillary. Is there are there people on the other side that have the same view of Western society as us being less civilized?
Absolutely, but I think that they have different elements. So the West, thinks of itself as civilized in terms of being, democratic and being more orderly and more successful and more efficient and other characteristics like that. I think some of the people in the East think of themselves as having higher morals. And we can see that here even with the sexual, liking sexual and marital jealousy, having, more respect for your wife, for your woman. But certainly in terms of moral value, definitely they see themselves as being higher. And that's not all Middle Easterners. I mean, there is, I'm talking about the stereotype. The stereotype is, that Westerners are much more, sexually loose. And this is not such a good thing. So yeah, there are stereotypes, definitely. Yeah.
I took recently a freshman college history course, and we talked about the Crusades a little bit. And one of the favorite theories of my professor was that the Crusades were useful to the Westerners in that troublemakers in a particular court were sent off on the Crusades in the hopes they would die. In battle, and that's how they got rid of second and third sons and things like that. Did you run across any anecdotes like that? The usefulness of the Crusades wasn't all religious; it was like political,
Yeah, and no, absolutely, certainly, and even I will add to that even economic, because some people are making the argument that there was a lot of poverty in Europe, and and some of these poor people basically
inherited more.
And basically they joined the Crusaders in search of better economic life because they were so poor there, similar to how some people are coming to the United States in search of a better economic life. Not for any political reasons, but of course the religious argument, the religious rhetoric was there to rile the troops, to rile everybody, and the Crusades are understood to be penitentiary wars. Basically, you are making a contract that you have to repent, and you're repenting by going and killing. So this is your repentance because you have sinned, and when you do that, you basically are signing the contract with heaven. This is your entrance ticket to heaven. This is sort of the religious understanding, but people really didn't think about the Crusades in these terms. The reasons they joined did not necessarily have to do with signing the penitentiary contract, but a lot of them actually did. Yeah.
What about just loot, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
They loot. Not only that, but there was the janissaries. The Arabs would hire other mercenary soldiers. You could get a good job with them. They're going to pay me more, right?
The point actually you're bringing is supported by historical evidence that in the territories of, let me see if I can go back to it. Oh, here. Okay, so here in these little sort of kingdoms, they were ruled by Western Crusaders, and then they were ruled by local Arabs. And then what happened is we tend to think that the Crusaders were all sticking with each other, and the Arabs were all sticking with each other, and it was always Crusader against Arab, Crusader against Muslim, but that was not the case. More often, the Crusaders were in alliance with the Muslims and with other Christian Arabs against another Crusader kingdom. And the same thing goes for the local population. They were in alliance with the Crusader against another person who had a claim maybe on what they were on the land that they were ruling. So there was looting, of course. Even when the Crusades walked through Europe to go to the Middle East, I mean, they just left a trail of damage, devastation. Yeah.
Just a comment on her historian teacher's theory of sending delinquents to war. That's still a very common practice. I thought when I was in the military that I thought that the go to war, go to jail cadences were a joke until I found out that one of my battle buddies who I'd spent extensive time around with ammunition and weapons and live ammunition had been given a plea deal to, if his case for an accidental death while intoxicated, he killed his buddy on accident, would be dismissed if he enlisted.
Yeah.
That's a real life case that I had. If you want pop culture, the Wall, the North, and Game of Thrones. And if you want another fictional example, look at the Bible. David tried to send people to war. Sam tried to send David to war. So it's a very common practice, not just within the Crusades, but within the context of war itself. People try to get rid of some of their, what they consider hostile or violent or troublemakers by sending them to war.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this information. I agree with you. Yeah.
I just want to add on just an example, like the recent jihadis in Taliban, or like especially in Afghanistan, it was kind of the same. They were sending, like the Arab countries, they were sending their criminals or people who have extreme thoughts to Afghanistan so that they don't have to deal with them. So it was kind of, that's what actually what created the Al-Qaeda, which is like the database, was that kind of thing, the people with this extreme thinking. And I just want to add like some information because I'm from Middle East.
What country are you from?
Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
For example, just as you said, like the Crusaders may have like their own conflicts. Also, like on the Arab world, Saladin, which is considered a hero, but not all Arabs. As you know, like if you have like heard about Sunni and Shia, most of Shia don't consider Saladin as a like strong person or like as a leader, because he actually like Shia were controlling Egypt, and Saladin like what can I say, like destroyed their government in Egypt, and he conquered Egypt and brought it back to Sunni regime. So the fights actually like also on Arab world. And just one last addition, I really respect what you showed us, but also like you kind of used what Arabs said about Crusaders to judge Crusaders, and that's kind of not fair, because like they were there in a fight. Of course, like everybody tried to make the other person look bad, just like or also like social ignorance. Like I mean, now even with Facebook and media and everything, a lot of people here think people from Afghanistan or Pakistan, not here, I mean in America, but because here it's like a lot of people are really culture oriented. Think of people there are living in deserts with goats. So I mean, like what you brought is kind of what Arab thinks of those people. It not have to be true. Maybe there was something different. Because I know like the chastity device was, what I know is what's like invented in those crusades. Like the Crusader warriors were like looking at their wives before they go to the war.
Yeah, all the information I brought here is what we read in the historical accounts, and a lot of that has to do with creating stereotypes, as I said, positive and negative stereotypes of the Crusaders. And I'm bringing this information not to affirm it, but actually to challenge a narrow understanding of the Crusades that comes only from 18th century rhetoric that has to do with civilizing missions and that has to do with the Enlightenment and the conflict between East and West, the modern conflict. So my point is basically, let's look at what people have written, not necessarily to believe it, but basically to serve as another point of entrance to understand the complexity of what has happened, and especially to challenge a straight line of heritage that starts from the 11th century to the 21st or the 20th, 21st century, that is unchallenged, basically one long civilizing mission. So basically that's what I'm questioning. And you're absolutely right, these are stereotypes, as I said. I'm actually curious, have you seen this in Iraq?
Actually, in Iraq, he usually preferred to make himself as Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. You know, the guy who fought Persians. So when he was fighting Persian, he was using that one. When he was fighting Americans and like rocketing Israel, he was using this one. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
This is a yes
That's
or
your
no.
last question.
This is just a yes or no. Did the plague happen at the same time as the Crusades?
The plague was what, 13th century?
So it was later, maybe?
There are several plagues, not just one.
How about like the black plague, the bubonic plague?
Who knows the date?
I just wondered if they were.
Do you know the
happening at
dates?
same time.
1340?
Okay, so that was
1340.
later. Okay.
It's after
The
I
big
guess,
one.
but I mean the Crusades continued.
That's it.
Well, thank you very much.